Hello, good morning. It's Thursday, January the 8th, as Britain joins the US efforts to blockade Russian oil tankers and Europe worries about Greenland. Is Keir Starmer focusing enough on the domestic front, or do his reforms risk sliding backwards this year? My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And my name is Sam Coates of Sky News. Keir Starmer is promising to solve some of the most contentious, the most complex domestic issues in 2026. But has he got into a habit of flinching if even a minority of his own MPs rebel, as happened over farmers and inheritance tax just before Christmas? It's all coming up in the next few months. Another go at welfare reform, ending jury trials, that wasn't in the manifesto, reform of special needs provision for children, guidance on single-sex spaces, cancelling elections. Each one of those requires ministers to make dizzying, contentious, nuanced decisions and the backing of his party.
Just today, the government is being asked for more time in the Lords for the assisted dying bill so that it can pass before the guillotine of the King's Speech in May. So many things piling up in that 2026 in tray for Keir Starmer. Each one guaranteed to prompt a rebellion, but given his precarious domestic position, well, no one will be sure if he'll stick or twist on each one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's just worth spelling out the obvious, isn't it, Anne? Given that some of those in Labour are thinking about life after Keir Starmer, and they definitely are. We know that for them, their priority in the first instance might suddenly be pleasing Labour members and Labour MPs and Labour-affiliated unions, rather than voters more widely. This, bluntly, makes domestic reform, tough domestic reform, the sort of thing that governments should be able to do at this stage of a parliament, so much harder.
We're asking that question today after the Prime Minister told MPs yesterday he was in listening mode over the huge rise in business rates. Well, that sounds tantamount to thinking about a partial climb down, yet another one. The Prime Minister has been taking soundings on how to join up his message more generally. And one piece of advice that I know he has been given by a couple of people that he listens to is that government needs to join up different projects and announcements much more, particularly when what we used to call the levelling up agenda and more support for stressed towns and communities. But if you've got projects in place to do that, there's something called the Pride of Place strategy is one of them, a kind of national renewal bulwark against the advance of Reform UK. But at the same time, many of these places are directly affected in shops and pubs at the edge of commercial viability, being pushed over by business rates. Well, what have you gained? So I can see potentially very difficult conversation there with the Chancellor.
That's right. Look, this whole issue of business rates we've been flagging all week on the podcast. It's an issue because of the huge increase in bills that lots of pubs and high street stores and hotels are facing because the government is having to remove pandemic discounts and there's a big revaluation of rates. And all of that means that in about 3 years' time, the pubs and hotels are facing increase of 80, 90, 100% plus. And that just feels quite unsustainable. And there is a big and noisy campaign to try and do something about it beyond the transitional relief that's already been promised.
At Prime Minister's Questions, Rachel Maskell, the Labour MP for York Central, no shrinking violet, she called on Keir Starmer to review the proposals to help, as she put it, avert a crisis on the high street. His answer, I thought, was the sort of answer that you give when you're beginning to look at some sort of a climb down. The government's continuing to talk to and work with the sector on support and what further support and action we can take. Note the word further.
And it was just about 4 hours later, Anne, that I started getting messages, rumours in the industry that actually there is some kind of specific announcement coming at some point relatively soon. Maybe one source suggested something that helps pubs, but doesn't help hotels, pubs being perhaps more politically sensitive. But talking to a lot of people, if you do a one-off grant, then that's expensive and doesn't make the ultimate problem, which bites in 3 years' time, go away. And hotels are amongst the worst affected and get the biggest increase in business rates in 3 years' time. So there's still big issues there. But the politics and the economics of rolling over the treasury on this are just so hard. And to my ear, a couple of days ago, they sounded like they pretty much wanted to stick and were being quite stubborn.
Well, that's interesting because the Times this morning is also reporting government sources saying it's inevitable that some form of financial support would be examined, and claiming that there's a rebellion of more than 30. And it's just a reminder, and actually, I do think, Sam, you kicked off this debate this week on the podcast and been subsequently a lot of arguments about where it leaves the Prime Minister. But one thing is absolutely clear: as someone who has a landslide behind him, an official majority of 167. But as we saw with the farmers' tax, it doesn't seem to take more than a few dozen MPs to be able to force a rethink at the moment.
Yeah, everywhere you look, it just feels quite tricky. Here's a nugget that I picked up yesterday, which I find fascinating. Tiny thing. In the budget, Rachel Reeves promised that there would only be one assessment a year against her fiscal rules, the dreaded fiscal rules, rather than two of them, and that the OBR wouldn't be doing that as part of its forecasts this spring. But I was told yesterday that requires primary legislation to stop the OBR doing that, and they don't think they're going to get it through in time. So one big thing that Rachel Reeves promised just isn't going to happen. It's not quite clear what the OBR will do. I haven't heard back from the Treasurer on how they hope to square that circle, but it's just everywhere you look, it's all tricky.
You read out a long list of domestic priorities earlier, Sam, ranging from special needs, single-sex guidance, jury trials. Each one of them could mean a rebellion at this precarious time, and each one of them has groups of MPs even within the Labour Party who have very strong interests and quite often quite different views about where things should go.
At the start of the year, one special advisor said that Keir Starmer had more or less nailed the foreign affairs agenda, but had left the domestic agenda more or less to Rachel Reeves in 2025. In 2026, I think one of the most crucial figures for Keir Starmer when it comes to the domestic agenda is going to be the Education and Equality Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. For me, she is the person to watch over the next 12 months because so many of the most contentious, the most politically toxic things are in her in trait specifically. And so how she handles the politics of the next few weeks and months is going to be absolutely critical.
Yes, Bridget is definitely a bellwether figure, I think, in all of this. According to the Playbook this morning, Keir Starmer is on a visit to a children's centre in Bedfordshire with her to promote the introduction of the legislation to get rid of the two-child benefit cap. In fairness, trying to join up some of the things that MPs complain are not very joined up at all about the Labour agenda, trying to show that there is that connection in what they're doing. So we'll be getting an interview with Bridget Phillipson mid-morning. Maybe you could scoop it for us, Sam.
She's going to try and focus on those reforms, that two-child benefit cap. She's been a message carrier for this government. She's one of the most frequent government performers on the morning media round. I think this morning she's going to want to just slightly skirt some of the more difficult issues. Whether she's able to do that, I'm not sure. But let me just give you a bit of an overview of just how challenging her brief is right now. She's got two massive things in her in tray. One is SEND reform, special needs reform for kids, and the other is the guidance on single-sex spaces in the light of the Supreme Court ruling last year. All of that coming in the next few weeks and months. So why don't we go through a bit about what I know on each, and I really want to know what you make of it all. Let's start with special needs reform. There is already campaign groups of MPs, really nervous about what she's promising, and attempts to work out the shape of the reforms. There was a Times story just before Christmas, government sources calling it irresponsible journalism, for their attempts to find out what's going on. So it's clearly massively sensitive. I'm not sure it was that irresponsible, but there you go. Right. So on special needs reform, everybody agrees the system needs changing. The costs are ballooning, but as I think allies of Bridget Phillipson would point out, it's about much more than money. It's about ending this practice of kids being taken out of mainstream education, mainstream schools, going long distances to special units, special schools, away from their homes, out of their communities, sometimes in taxis, although that comes from a different budget. And that just doesn't work. And the white paper for that will suggest the reform plan which will suggest the reform plan is coming, we think, pretty much next month, so in February.
Do we get a sense already of what is in it?
Well, we know some of the basics. Bridget Phillipson wants to get to a situation where every child can be educated in mainstream schools, right? That's the sort of basic philosophy, which is a change, right? That is a kind of pretty fundamental philosophical change on how it works at the moment. But the question is how you get there. Do you equip every school with the resources, extra staff, training? That, to do that properly is a massive, mega, jumbo, expensive effort. There's no school that doesn't want massive extra resources to accommodate everybody in their area, but can you afford to do that truly properly well? The second thing that they need to stop is the situation where parents are endlessly going through the legal system, legal wrangling, to force councils to get their children statemented, i.e. to recognise the special needs of the kids, which also brings extra money to fund their needs, maybe raising the bar or some such. But, that is the really complicated, really contentious bit. I am told there will still be some legal protections. It's just not clear what there is. And thirdly, and Bridget Phillipson did talk about this on the Political Currency podcast over Christmas, there's the question of who funds the £5 or £6 billion budget in future. Currently, it's coming out of councils. There's an emergency provision, which means it's off the books of local councils, but that's all transferring to central government in the second half of this parliament. But literally nobody knows where that money is coming from. Bridget Phillipson says it's not coming from the schools budget. Other departments are literally polishing their machine guns to ward off any attempt to raid, for instance, the council budgets. They're not going to be funding. This is a big Whitehall war brewing over what is effectively a jumbo black hole and a big fiscal decision delayed.
Just listening to what you're saying, Sam, the question at the heart of it is also whether the government is politically strong enough to repeal or push back in some way, even if not formally repeal, the legal right of parents to get their children statemented in such numbers that these figures have risen so sharply. We know Bridget Phillipson and her team and others have been tangling with this for a long time, but you still come down to that, don't you? That it's not only your MPs and departments, but you've got a lot of people who are very, very motivated, or the system has motivated them to make sure that they get this particular statement, and that gives them particular rights when it comes to the way that their children are going to be treated and educated, and they feel strongly about it.
Yeah, I think that's entirely right. Look, kudos to Bridget Phillipson and her team. She knows how complex this is, how sensitive this is, how high stakes this is. I mean, it's taking a long time to get these draft reforms out of the traps, but that's because they know just how thorny and difficult and how likely people are to fight it. So the message from this podcast to all sides is we're going to follow this pretty closely. So if you are an MP getting stuck in, if you know the system, if you're in the local council system, watching it from that perspective, do get in touch with us, because I think both of us want to keep quite a close eye on this. Right. The second thing, Anne, that Bridget Phillipson's got in her in tray, I mean, bluntly, could be even more tricky, right? That is how the government deals with the issue of single-sex spaces. So this is, in effect, Bridget Phillipson's other hat, because she's also the Equality Secretary as well as being Education Secretary. Now, you'll remember last year, the Supreme Court ruled on single-sex spaces. Now, the precise implications for, shops, for public spaces, about what that means, well, everybody needs guidance about what the Supreme Court ruling means in practice. And the Equalities and Human Rights Commission sort of, it's their job to come up with that guidance. They produced it in private, sent it to government for publishing, and it's there that it has been stuck. Can you just explain why this is all just such a challenge?
Well, as you say, it turns on this delay in publishing guidance essentially on single-sex spaces in the wake of that unanimous ruling by the Supreme Court last year that legally a woman should be defined by biological sex for the purposes of the Equalities Act. Well, a couple of things matter here, Sam. One is that Phillipson herself, as Equalities Minister, signalled that she tonally wants to soften a line perhaps against some more gender-critical colleagues. She said in a recent interview with The Times, trans people had been used as a political punchbag in order to make an argument. We have to take a step back from this and do it responsibly. But beyond tonality, it doesn't take us very far. So I'm told by an MP who takes a very strong interest in this and is also a senior lawyer in his previous incarnation, that there is another reason perhaps for this havering, which is the implications of the judicial review challenge, which is being brought by the Good Law Project and 3 anonymous individuals. And they are arguing that the EHRC guidance itself was unlawful and breaches transgender people's human rights. So is it possible, and you ask the question, that Bridget Phillipson, as well as some frustration perhaps about how her dealings are going with EHRC, is also perhaps waiting on that judgment, because I think that will also reopen the question about where it leaves the rights of people who have transitioned and of trans people when you dealing with single-sex spaces, and what the practical results would be for them as well as for biological women.
A lot of that makes a lot of sense. Every bit of this is complicated. And again, I know that Bridget Phillipson is totally aware of the strength of feeling on all sides and is attempting to be sensitive in something that, occupies the minds of, particularly the labour movement, possibly more than other sections of society. I am told that all of those court cases, the challenges and all the rest of it, and the need to do this properly means that this isn't coming out imminently. Allies of Bridget Phillipson tell me that it may come this side of Easter, but it may not come this side of Easter. So that gives you a sense that it's not coming out at any time that soon, and that is in part because of those live legal cases that you rightly say they need to take into consideration. They also say they need to consult the devolved administrations, and when I pushed, is that really a good grounds for delay? I was told, look, if you don't do that properly, it's yet another grounds for JRing once the guidance come out. So you have to do that, otherwise you fall foul of a kind of technical legal hurdle, and nobody wants that.
But I'm still a bit curious from what you've been hearing, Sam, do you believe that there's, just to put it very bluntly, kind of bad blood now between Bridget Phillipson, her teams, and the Equality and Human Rights Commission? Because it also has new leadership, which can often mean that there's some sort of, if not a 360 degree, 180 degree, I think we say that we pivot, it can mean that messaging can change. And where are we on the relationship between the minister responsible and the commission in the eye of the storm on this?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, right? So the EHRC handed this government, handed the government this guidance, and they say it is, legally robust, the EHRC. But I think quite explicitly, even on the record in interviews over Christmas, Bridget Phillipson is saying, no, I need to go through this guidance and check it is legally watertight. So there is already a gap, but actually it turns out that the difference is a lot more. Well, now, first of all, allies of Bridget Phillipson absolutely contest any notion that any delay is because she doesn't care about single-sex spaces. They say that's ridiculous. It's just about trying to make this legally watertight, which is something that the EHRC say it is. Now, here I am actually picking up some grumpiness from allies of Bridget Phillipson towards the EHRC. So the new Labour chosen head of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission is Mary-Ann Stevenson, who began work in December. And she's been saying that the version of the guidance given by the EHRC to government is legally sound. But clearly, and this will be obvious from what I've told you, that the government doesn't agree. Allies of Phillipson say pointedly that that's what we're doing. We're making it legally watertight. But if you can't see that division from space, they went further. One ally of Bridget Phillipson said to me, in fact, they think the EHRC has acted in staggeringly bad faith over all of this. And they think that the whole issue has been made more difficult than it needed to be.
Wow. They weren't holding back there, were they? But that is also why I'm just intrigued by this, because I see a lot of MPs, lawyers, people who have been quite strong in this fight, thinking let's just wait, let's get this ruling or this review ruling handed down, judicial review, and then we can take it forward. But you seem to be suggesting from your sourcing, Sam, that it's actually allies Bridget Phillipson pretty much directly on the attack. What's to be gained by that? Because although you said something quite interesting earlier, we went past as yes, in the Labour movement and perhaps generally on the left, there's more interest in this than in wider sections of society. We also do know that there are others on the other side of the argument. You can think of aspects of Reform UK and parts of the Conservative Party as well, who actually wouldn't mind this coming back into the headline, because they'll say Labour can't even sort out this issue. It's a bit risky, isn't it, to pick this fight?
I mean, Cami is slightly surprised. Staggeringly bad faith is quite something to say about a body, a government public body, the head of whom Labour has chosen. So I don't know. We'll just have to see how this rattles around. I think that, as I say, Bridget Phillipson is thinking very deeply about this, but clearly there are frustrations. It feels to me like the frustrations are spilling over. I have to say, Anne, frustrations will spill over with us if we continue talking for much longer, because we have bust our 20-minute limit. Although I found the stuff today really, really fascinating. Can we just give a plug for the podcast awards? We want your votes, listeners, please.
We do. Yeah, we really, really, really want. I don't want to delay on that one. Yes, it's the Political Podcast Awards. If you go to the website for that, there is a category called the People's Choice, which is a bit like getting to be a people's peer. So you could send Sam and me to the lords of podcasting Valhalla. If you cast your vote for Politics at Sam and Anne's, we'd be super grateful.
Okay, on that metaphor, I'm going to bring everything to a close rather quickly. We will see you next week for Politics and Sam and Anne. Have a wonderful weekend.